And then the question becomes, is that who made up that rule, but also what is the difference between I'm worshiping and I am engaging this vibe?
Welcome to Liturgical Shenanigans, a Wayfolk Arts podcast, with your hosts, Hannah,
Phil,
Jackson,
And Maddie.
Hello, everyone.
Hey!
Welcome back.
Welcome back to the show.
Welcome back to Liturgical Shenanigans. We're excited to be chatting with you this week and getting into another liturgical topic.
It's a shenanigan. What?
Yeah.
I'm feeling rusty.
Today we're kind of going to turn our focus to some shenanigans around the liturgical element of worship. And just going to have some conversation around, especially like praise anthems and songs. Music specifically, how that interacts with us as worshipers and us as worship designers, but also kind of the church and the worship community at large. How it is a deeply personal experience and deeply felt experience, and also encourage us towards some mindfulness with that experience as well.
Yeah. But Jackson, I think you prepared something for us to get us started.
Yeah.
It's been a while since we've engaged a liturgy on liturgical shenanigans.
It's true. Kind of as a frame or a focus for us to jump into the conversation here. This is just a short, probably mostly a poem, but perhaps also a liturgy that I wrote to kind of bring us into this conversation. So, as is often our practice, as we turn to hearing some crafted words, we encourage you to take a moment and allow your soul to catch up to yourself. Take a breath.
What an image. Sorry.
Take a breath. Breathe in and out again. And listen to these words. For those whose love for worship and songs of praise is held in tension with a suspicion of manipulation, who love to hear the voice of God in song, but fear to be lied to again, Lord, we lift our voices to you. For the ones who found their shoulders were still heavy after their chains were gone, who sang Hosanna, but know that joy is a hard thing to come by. Lord, we lift our voices to you. For when throwing your hands heavenward no longer feels like relief, but like a tightrope act swaying in the winds of doubt, faith, and your ever-widening perspective, Lord, we lift our voices to you.
That last stanza hit good. I can remember like the time when I switched from very automatically being a person who would raise her hands in worship because that's just what my youth group did and that's what everybody did at the church camp we would go to every summer, and then it suddenly feeling increasingly more uncomfortable. And literally feeling like some chains were holding my hands back from lifting. It shifted during seminary, especially. And it shifted because I was with a vibe of people that did not worship in that way.
Right.
And like that tension of, so was I doing it for showmanship all along? Do I just I don't know. It's just interesting.
Yeah.
So
That's
a good
such
stanza.
It's such a complicated. Thank you. Yeah, it's such a complicated part of this experience. Coming for anyone who's come from maybe I don't know if necessarily fully charismatic, but certainly a praise-oriented worship experience of encouraging kind of like embodied practices, which are good. Like we talk about embodied practices all the time on this podcast. But the kind of embodied elements of singing songs together, and then that line about the shifting perspective, whether that's your worship community changes or you have more context, more knowledge, more things, more dissonance, more wonderings as you enter a worship space. The heaviness of throwing your hands heavenward becomes kind of a weird juxtaposition.
It starts to feel vulnerable in a way that it didn't feel before. It was just automatic, and now all of a sudden it feels like this vulnerable act, which perhaps it was all along. But yeah, it's just interesting.
I feel like, because similarly, I feel like the church I grew up in wasn't as much of like a raise your hands church. Sometimes it was, but not super often. But in college, we had, for sure, like the Sunday night worship gatherings. That was generally like a raise your hands sort of place. And
yes, that's true of my college experience too.
Yeah, right? Like it felt really good to be embodied in that way. But then moving to other places where it like wasn't as prevalent, or like one of the things that made it easy in the night service is all the lights were dim.
Yeah.
But like every other place that I've worshipped is very brightly lit.
It's
very
in the daytime.
easy to see you, and raising your hands is really vulnerable.
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially if, like more recently, being in a worshiping community that is so head-oriented and so doctrine-minded, which is so beautiful. Like that is a gift to know that the words that I'm singing have this very rich, challenging, beautiful theology. The words feel so much more like poetry now.
Yeah.
But to sort of have that juxtaposition of like, I don't feel connected to my body as much in the same way. But I don't know that it would feel authentic to do that anymore.
Well, and we've talked about this, but atmosphere makes up so much of the worship experience, and I always struggle with is the reason my body isn't as connected because of the space that I'm in and the way that the space I'm in is inviting me to engage it, or is it actually about me, or is it both? Has something shifted in me that this just doesn't serve me to worship this way anymore, or it's not something that I feel comfortable doing, or it's genuinely I've had some kind of internal shift that it isn't how I engage it, or is it I've been invited into a more doctrine-focused practice, for example, like you named, and so I'm not going to engage it in this way anymore.
Right. Well, I do feel like there was a point in college where it did feel so much more like showmanship, like we're doing this because this is what we do, because this is how you show that you're actually worshiping, is it has to show outwardly. So there was also a lot of pressure to show up in that way, which is also one of the reasons why I liked it when it was dark, because it you couldn't see other people as much and it didn't matter as much. But in some of the other occasional worship spaces where people still did that, but it wasn't as dark.
Well, and I grew up in a very evangelical context, and if you weren't raising your hands or something shifted in the way you engaged in worship, you would absolutely be getting a call from a pastor or a youth leader. Like, hey, I noticed that you weren't really as engaged in worship and praise. What's going on? Is something going on that we should talk about? And so there was this legitimate pressure. I'm going to get a call if I don't look like I'm really enjoying this right now. I cannot appear to be suffering.
That's a lot of weight to having that experience that's already quasi performative, already worrying about what other people might think, but also the lyrics that you're saying are also often. I mean, worship music often is written from a perspective of someone going through suffering, going through hard times, reaching out to God for help and things like that. So if you're already in this space of wondering whether you need to perform, you're also kind of performatively engaging with suffering, which is also dissonant.
Well, okay, and that's just true of all music, right? We listen to music generally that either matches the vibe that we're currently feeling. So Taylor Swift does that for me big time, right? Or that we intentionally want it to lift us out of a mood that we're feeling.
Yes.
And that's not bad. But what's tricky about worship music is it's done to you. As the worshiper, unless I'm on the worship team, unless I'm leadership at that church, I am not actively participating in deciding what the mood or the vibe of the worship is going to be. It's just happening to me.
Yeah.
And now there's pressure that I have to engage it and perform it accordingly so nobody thinks I'm not engaging it correctly. And now I'm questioning of whether or not, am I crying because the Spirit is genuinely in this space with me and I'm upset, or am I crying because it's really loud and I'm overstimulated and I didn't ask to sing this song today and here I am.
Yep. Yeah.
Well, I think, so that's really interesting. I feel like I have memories of certain worship experiences growing up, or not experiences, but worship communities growing up where like praise songs were the only thing we sang. Mm-hmm. We wouldn't sing songs of lament or songs of confession. It would just be praise. So praise that's another, I think another gift of some of the worshiping communities that I've experienced since then is the songs chosen for the service fit a liturgical moment.
Yeah.
So throughout the service, there is a moment of praise. There is a moment of confession. My brain's blanking on some of the other moments right now. But you can have multiple emotions or states of being engaged within one worship service. So I feel like that allows for more people to have a moment where they show up authentically. And then if you can't show up authentically to all of them, you know that it's okay because there's this multiplicity of states of being, of relationship, moments of relationship with God within one service.
Yeah. Yes, in one service, and I really appreciate the special services that exist throughout the liturgical calendar, particularly in like Christmas time, where it really becomes a happy-go-lucky every single service. Jesus is going to be born, yay! And like blue Christmas services or services of light and hope are often the special services that exist during that liturgical season, and I much prefer that service to any other Christmas service that's going on because, hello, I love to sit and lament. Why would we be happy ever? But not all spaces normalize that or do it. There are definitely spaces that are like, this is the time to be happy. Or I've had the experience of we're singing about lament, but we're singing about why we're still happy and praising God in our lament.
Right.
So we're acknowledging that I'm in pain, but you heal, and it's going to be okay, and I'll praise you in this pain.
Yeah, it's that abrupt, like, psalm emergency break of,
Yeah.
like, lament, praise.
And then I feel like I'm doing something wrong when I'm outside of that space, and I don't want to praise. I want to be sad. And now you've also not allowed me to process through my sadness. You've made me skip to... It's very silver lining.
Yeah.
Yeah. We were chatting before a little bit about like how like praise-centric, joy-centric music in general seems to be the current dominant mode. With a number of notable exceptions in worship music, that not everyone is doing this, but it feels like it's much more possible to listen through like either on the radio if you listen to CCM or some sort of worship music on the radio, or even
CCM being
Christian contemporary music.
Oh, okay.
Yes, which might be a dated definition of what.
There's one of our professors talked about what does contemporary mean.
Yeah. Who knows now?
Who is
anymore?
contemporary?
And like, especially because CCM still plays things from like the early aughts.
Oh goodness!
Like how,
and earlier, right? There's still Michael W.
like
Smith.
Rich Mullins still shows up every once in a while.
Yeah.
And there's a place for that. I mean, there's a legitimate group
huge
of
place for
people
it.
and a need that people have to experience joy. Like I said, we turn to music that either matches the vibe we're in or helps us enter a different vibe because we want to. I think the tricky thing is it's just such a dominating thing. Joy is the dominating vibe.
It makes it difficult for there to be a space, like you were saying, for anyone to exist that's not in that place.
Yeah.
So like our local radio station literally is joy numbers. But like, if Christianity is this, it really reminds me of the old. Hopefully, this is with I've got the joy down in my heart.
Yeah, sure.
Like, can I say that without us getting in? I don't know. Maybe it's
As long as you
copyrighted.
don't sing it, I think.
I've got the wonderful love of my blessed Redeemer. But
Down in the depths of it.
but this idea like that to be Christian means to find that break and to be able to smile, or in my suffering be able to tell everybody how God is good. Or even that I'm going to be uplifted by a station that really, like, all of the commercials and everything is like how uplifting it is. And sometimes that's what folks need.
Yeah.
But like, I think it's really, I often come there and I'm like, oh, there's no room for me here.
Yeah. And it doesn't teach the very important skill of just sitting in it, which is part of any healing process. You just sometimes have to sit in the crap. I was actually thinking about this for those of us who spent our formative years in the church, or at least this is the case for me. I grew up going to church. So I grew up in an environment that was always, this is hard, let's be happy together. As an adult, it is still physically painful for me to sit in pain or to sit in sadness or to sit really in any feeling at all. But I think part of that is because it was never modeled to me, because the space I was in was so insistent on, why would we sit in pain when we can praise the loving, good, joyful God? This is temporary, look forward to the future thing, which again has a time and place. But if we're not ever creating space for people to learn that skill set, oof, it's hard.
Yeah, a big blindside arrives, and suddenly like your heart songs can't affect, or don't have the same effect as they did before, and so then that like kind of tertiary third stage of
Everyone knows what tertiary means.
Yeah.
I absolutely did not. I've heard the word before.
Yeah. But that third stage of like you experienced a song that you had an emotional impact on you and resonated so deeply. Then you have the second stage of like, oh, it's not resonating as much anymore, and you have the third stage of like, why did it ever?
Yeah, and you get the ick.
Yeah. Yeah, and so without the practice, without I'll just stick with practice. Without the practice of having to navigate through times of hardship, with praise, with music, with some sort of liturgical marking of it.
Yeah,
those moments can be very disruptive and disorienting.
Phil and I have talked about this with funeral music choice.
Ooh, yeah,
And how so much funeral music choice is happiness, because why this is a celebration of life. We're not mourning, we're grateful for where they are and where they want the life that they did have and they leave behind.
And often the deceased has chosen these songs.
Yeah.
yeah.
You know, these are the songs I loved, these are songs that represent me, and this is what I want to be remembered as.
Sure.
Yeah.
But also like how you kind of want to be careful about the music you pick, because now that music is always going to be associated with that death.
Yep.
And we specifically talked about this when we were going to like a child's funeral,
Yeah.
which is a very, there's all death is sad. And there's a difference between the older person who has planned their funeral. They knew it was coming. People got to say goodbye. And the child who very tragically and unexpectedly passed, or took their own life. And that was a summer of, I don't know how, we had several funerals for children that summer, and all of them played like the same 3 praise songs. And so now anytime I hear those songs, I have like a body memory of being in those funerals surrounded by these just hysterical children, understandably, trying to sing about this loving, just 10,000 reasons why you're so great, God. And it was meeting a need in the people that picked those songs. And that is good and fair. But how do we balance the reality that there are other needs in this space beyond the people who got to make all these decisions, and who's quote unquote matter the most, like who gets to dominate.
And I think it's really interesting to think about what it means moving forward. The weight we add to songs, like, and I don't know that that's a bad thing, but I do know that I've had conversations with multiple people, even at the church that we're at now, where a loved one's funeral had this song, and maybe it's a song that's played on a certain day every year or something like that, and now that person maybe doesn't want to go to church on that day, because or if they do, when that song plays, they know it's just always going to be a gut punch, and maybe that's their energy for the day. That they're just going to be, because music, like all the things, is so sensory, so body.
It is,
even if we're not moving. Like smelling the cookies, right? Like you're back in a time and place. Maybe I've got songs that are very like riding in the car as a kiddo.
For sure.
Certain it would be 80s music.
But
like
mine is early 2000s emo.
That too. That's going to be like The Bus or something.
Right.
Yeah.
To that point too, I don't know if you guys have this experience, but I have, whenever I go to concerts, it's hard for me. I have like I feel like I'm in church right now moments with the way that my whole body is getting involved in. We went to the Fall Out Boy concert in March, and I literally have said it was a religious experience for me, because it just was. But I still sometimes find myself having feelings of guilt when my body is engaging that space in a similar way to how my body at one time engaged worship. Like hands in the air, whole body in it, eyes closed, singing pretty much to the heavens. Sugar, we're going down swinging. Like, and I mean, I love it, but I still have that part of me that feels like I'm somehow being blasphemous or something. And then the question becomes, is that who made up that rule, but also what is the difference between I'm worshiping and I am engaging this vibe?
Yeah.
Did I ask that question coherently?
That's a really great question.
Because the idea being that the more I'm feeling music, or the more I'm like almost in an out of body in my body experience, is somehow like it's more worshipful.
Yes.
And I don't know that that's
I have felt
at all true.
Yeah.
Well, it's also not that it's not worshipful.
No.
But like.
But is it more?
Right.
Like.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and who gets to define whether or not it's more? Because I would argue that
your youth pastors that are calling you.
Sure. I would argue though that for me, like I've been to concerts and literally felt like said out loud, I feel like I met God more in that space than in any other church I've ever been.
Sure.
Yeah.
Which makes sense.
Well, yeah. And so to some degree, this isn't the only answer, but an answer is you get to decide.
Yeah.
And so what about, for me, just as I'm reflecting about how to try to answer the question I'm asking myself, what about my choice to feel more worshipful in a concert than I do in a praise service makes me freer to make that choice? And
was it a choice?
Or was I like moved in that direction?
Yes, because I feel like for me, if it was a choice, I would choose to do the thing that made me feel less guilty.
Yeah.
Why? If I could decide to feel that way in a church, why would I not be feeling that way in a church?
Yeah.
I think what I was thinking of with your question is we are a religious species, and music does music does that to us, where it pulls people together. It's why we chant in crowds. It's why, like at political rallies, right? It's it pulls us together into one spirit and one voice. And I think in my mind, as I'm framing it, it's what that voice is lifting up.
Yeah.
And that might be the difference between scripturally, where we're getting into some funky idolatry, or what is the value, what is the longing, is it the God who is light and love and unity and community, or is it something else? And I think in my mind that might be, are we bringing ourselves together to move toward that, or are we bringing ourselves together for something else? Which is probably okay sometimes. I think we can bring ourselves together to cheer for our football team.
Absolutely.
I don't think that's a community
value.
Yeah, and I think we can for a Fall Out Boy concert and just have a great time. But like if the Fall Out Boy concert was saying like, and now we're going to, cut off, think of half of our neighbors as non-human entities, and that's what Fall Out Boy was all about. I might have some issues. Yeah, we're going to some last But often, you know, I have found in my kind of, I don't feel like I can find myself in Christian music a lot of the time. I'm finding a lot more of the conversations that it seems like the church could be having, or that I'm having with God, in what we would call secular music. And it makes sense, because the reason these songs are playing on the radio over and over and over is because they resonate with a huge number of people.
Yes.
And so it is, in that sense, a religious experience, even if you're not at a concert, because we are being brought together to lift something up, or cry out about something.
Yeah. And when I'm engaging it in my car, it does feel like more of a choice than when I show up on Sunday and someone's dictated to me how we're going to be and what we're going to talk about.
Sure.
You don't have a dial where you can go like, next song.
Yeah. Well, and actually I don't even listen to the radio anymore, right? I'm listening to my curated playlist, so I really have control over how that's making me feel. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. I actually think that's an extremely important part about the human experience. But it's just, there's a tension there. And I think we as people are not great about allowing ourselves generally to sit in tension, but really, like, as Christians, to sit in the tension of the secular is not bad, and nor is it absent of God. We do not have to be only engaging Christian music to be worshiping. And there's a demographic of people that are deeply uncomfortable with that idea.
I have a question. It's a bit of a maybe move from where we are. So if anyone has things on this.
I have something, but it's kind of like going back just a beat.
Oh, please do.
It's just a thought.
Do yours.
The thought, I was thinking back to why those moments feel like holy moments. And apart from the shoulds of this, but like they often do feel more holy or more worshipful if you're fully embodied in the moment. And I think one of the reasons for that is because you feel so present to what is happening, which I think is true, at least in my experience, across the board for me, both in like actual worship moments, or in things like concerts or plays. For me, sometimes even during movies, something happens that makes almost like nothing but this particular moment matter. Like whatever happened before now, whatever's going to happen after this, like this, just having that fullness of presence, which is so hard to find in the rest of life, but makes these moments, especially when music is involved, is one of the things that makes them unique and special, is their ability to not just draw us together to lift together as a community to lift something up, but like together within oneself to lift something up.
Yeah.
I feel like those moments are harder and harder to come by.
Yeah.
For me, like across the board. And I feel like when I was younger, I'm not old.
You're old now.
I'm old. When I was younger, I feel like it was really easy. It felt really easy to access that. And it just doesn't anymore. So anyway, presence was what I wanted to.
Yeah.
Especially like who you're with was probably determined before you entered like a concert space or your car or versus church. You know, I don't always know who's going to be sitting next to me, who's going to show up that week. Yeah.
Phil, what was your thing?
Yeah, I wanted to just kind of, we've poked at this a couple times, but sort of the inclusivity, accessibility sort of piece where, what about for those, like I I was looking for a place where I was like, what do I have to say about this in the early part of our conversation where we're talking about like bringing our bodies into worship and lifting our hands. And that's not something I've ever wanted or been interested in doing. Like I've done it because, I guess we're doing this, but mostly I'm like, who's am I blocking anybody? I'm a taller, bigger person. Like that's where my brain's going to be. And I've worked on that because that's a me thing, but I'm always going to feel way more able to connect when I can let go of that and just show up in the space how I'm going to show up in the space, which often for me isn't singing. When I'm most connected to what's happening in the worship, I'm aware of the bodies around me doing this thing and my presence within it, and there's like this connection to the larger whole singing, where I'm almost still and. Yeah. Not observing sounds like it's not participatory, but it feels deeply participatory to me. Mm-hmm. And yet, in roles that I've had that are more leadership-y, I've known that that's not really okay.
Yeah.
I need to at least look enough like I'm singing. Oh my gosh, COVID masks were amazing, right?
Yes.
I didn't have to sing at all. I could, but I didn't have to.
Also, the ability that I have had to be present is less when I'm leading.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like, when I've worked in churches, I'm not present to worship really at all. Mm-hmm. Or if I'm part of the church, it's just not, mm-hmm. I'm not present. I'm going through the motions of trying to curate this experience for other people and mm-hmm. make sure that it's an experience that they're going to meet God in. And now I'm not a leader, but as a parent who's trying to wrangle my almost 2-year-old, mm-hmm. oh, absolutely not.
Mm-hmm. Well, so that's where I was going to go the other direction is, my 2 kiddos and especially my younger one was able to participate in a fully embodied way. And we used to like set up the back of our sanctuary so that kiddos who wanted to like be dancing and moving could be. Mm-hmm. And I guess I've been to some more Pentecostal or other kind of charismatic places where like whatever people are doing is fine. If you're dancing around or whatever, maybe except for what I would want to do, which looks pretty much like nothing. But that's kind of my question is I know a lot of the groups that I'm in make a big point to say, you show up here how you want. If you want to be silent, if you want to just observe, if that's what you have today, that's okay. And I think we might say that in some worship spaces, but there definitely is an expectation, at least in the worship teams and the leadership teams that I've worked on, that like that's our measure of how effective we're being at curating or what we do with our liturgies even, right? Like, are people engaged in it? Is it that kind of experience? And we don't know what engaged looks like.
Yeah.
And if we end up making it more about what it's supposed to look like, then that's what everybody's leaning toward, right? Like you're saying, like, mm-hmm. like, oh, we're raising our hands, or we're not raising our hands, or are we like, how do I do that? What does it even look like? And I don't expect us to know the answer to this, but to start to try to push against that and to be like, our deepest desire is that you are finding your ways to be in communion with this group of people and with the God we serve and love. And what that looks like, I don't know what that looks like for you, but our hope is that everybody can do that in the most authentic and just true way possible.
Yeah. It's easier to do it off of what people look like because it's external, but you don't know what's going on inside someone. Like it might, like the thing that you're describing, which is your happy place in worship, is that external stillness.
Yeah.
Like that might be deeply connected for someone, but that external stillness might signify something totally different for somebody else.
Right.
And the really embodiedness for someone else might mean that, like for your younger kiddo, like if they're dancing in the back, that might be joy and full presence. Or if they're, moving a lot in the back, it might mean they're in distress. Like you just don't know what's happening inside.
Maybe it's
of
worship.
people.
Maybe it's ADHD.
Maybe it's both.
Both. Well, that's the neurodiversity actually has a lot to do with what I'm talking about here, right? Because
sure.
the ways that different folks understand and connect with their bodies and their emotions is so different.
Mytism.
And I think it's really easy. I think it's actually
suffering.
difficult to not curate worship services for the neurotypical. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the question I was hoping to come to, because I could jump right on the judgmentalism bandwagon, because that's where I live in this particular conversation. But what does moving the other direction look like?
Yeah.
I think
culturally.
Yeah. I mean, I think it would be interesting to try to track how to like move in that other direction. I think for the most part, as far as how I've tried to engage that practically in worship spaces, is being clear about what your community does.
Mm-hmm. And what it needs.
And what it needs. And then also what like naming a couple of those things in service. Like if you want to stand there silently, that's awesome. That is like naming things that are awesome. And so that it is this kind of like open, not only open door, so that like people might feel welcome, but naming something that someone can see themselves in that is a welcome.
Yeah.
But then also like making intentional choices, rather than not thinking about it. So if you know that you're a church that is going to sing loud songs in the morning, say that at some point. like that can be part of your liturgy, is we're going to stand up and we're going to praise together. That sort of like energy is in the room, and people will know, and they might choose to find another church. But the people who will resonate with that style of worship will know that this is where I get to go to do this sort of thing.
Yeah.
If you are more like me and like sort of contemplative services,
Same.
then I mean, I've found that I've had to like the couple times that I've tried to use silence in services, I find that I have to give like at least a minute of like warning to people that you're going to be in just 20 to 30 seconds of silence.
Sure.
And in those 20 to 30 seconds of silence, let me tell you, everyone feels like the cough is there. And like everyone feels like, oh no, the sneeze that I wasn't going to sneeze the rest of the service is now happening now. And you get comments about that. And like that sort of like hospitable warning to like say, we're going to do this way today. Or we are a space that does this in this way, I think is a step towards.
Yeah.
Get all your body sounds out now, everybody. Do it,
Yeah.
do it now.
No, it's real. I also think involving as much as the community as possible in planning the thing makes a big difference.
Yeah.
Because that's going to answer the question
Yeah,
of
that's
what
good.
are the needs here. If you don't know the answer to that, that means that the people it's just not a representation of the people that are coming. I also was thinking about spaces that I felt like did this really well. And locally, we have a ministry specific for kiddos with autism. And their worship service
It's very, very fun.
is a lot. But because of the circumstance of the community and the population that joins this worship service, it's really just we're going to let be whatever is, because there's no controlling what these very neurospicy kiddos need. And that's beautiful. It's also a little overstimulating, depending on the day and the vibe. But that allowance that we're going to show up and let whatever is be is lovely. I think frightening also for those who really want control and want that hospitable like predictability. But even in a community where you just got to kind of let it go, there is still consistency, and that's where the hospitality comes out, right? Like, yes, I don't know, there might be a child yelling throughout the service standing next to me while I preach. That may happen today, who knows? But we are always going to do a prayer of confession at this time, and we are always saying this liturgy when we light the candle. You know, there's still some kind of consistency. But yeah.
Friends, that is about all the time that we have for this particular conversation.
No one else is allowed to say anything. Hannah had a
The
thought.
good thing is that the conversation continues over on Patreon. We have the after show.
We're putting it behind a paywall.
to continue to chat about these sorts of things. This conversation has been very rich. I hope that that it has kind of like stirred up things in you. Yeah. And if it has, and if you want people to continue having conversation with, we would love to be those people for you. You can find us on the socials.
The socials, the Facebooks,
Facebooks.
the Instagrams, nowhere else. Actually, we're not on the TikToks.
Pretty much just those two places right now.
No, so only two socials.
Also on the Patreons, though, you can find us at patreon.com/wayfolkarts. Number of different tiers of patronship over there, and just like patron only posts, after show things, connection with things that we have going on. It's a great space to also have the conversation.
You can also find us on Discord. We always link the channels. We have public channels. We have patron only channels. Why are you staring at me like that, Philip?
I was like, yeah, let's get over on the Discord.
Okay, so anyways,
I want more happening on Discord. It was
I
just
know.
like,
I know. Yeah,
let's wake that
there
up.
is
That
a
was what my face
Discord.
was.
Come back. Join us. You can chat with us there about different topics. There's different channels for different topics. If you feel like there's a channel missing for a topic you'd like to talk about, do it. Put it in the general channel. We'll probably make one if it means that you'll talk to us on there.
we'll make
But hey, we're really grateful that you're part of the Liturgical Shenanigans audience, and we'd love to hear your thoughts about this episode and something you hope that we talk about at a future date.
Yeah.
Happy Liturgical Day.
Happy Liturgical Day. And as a way to close out this particular episode, because we've brought the liturgies back, Jackson, would you read your liturgy for us one more time?
Sure thing.
Settle yourselves. Catch up to your soul. I said settle, not sell. I know.
It sounded like
It really sounded like you said so.
Jackson, edit that out. Settle yourselves. Catch back up to your souls. Breathe.
For those whose love for worship and songs of praise is held in tension with a suspicion of manipulation, who love to hear the voice of God in song but fear to be lied to again, Lord, we lift our voices to you. For the ones who found their shoulders were still heavy after their chains were gone, who sang Hosanna but know that joy is a hard thing to come by, Lord, we lift our voices to you. For when throwing your hands heavenward no longer feels like relief, but like a tightrope act swaying in the winds of doubt, faith, and ever-widening perspective, Lord, we lift our voices to you.